morning. Thank you for tuning into this important discussion today. My name is Nury Turkel. I'm a senior fellow here at the Hudson Institute. Our future in the free world is at crossroads. In today's world, China presents significant challenges to the world order, and much of that is present in the form of technology. One of the critical aspects of this has been China's use of state-of-the-art AI surveillance, advanced biometrics, and mandatory DNA testing. China touts its facial recognition software that can pick up an individual face out of 1.4 billion in seconds, and software to identify ethnic groups and emotions is also being tested and utilized. Public street lamps with motion sensors are not only being used, but also exported by Chinese tech giant CTE. The dystopian reality of China's surveillance is now spreading across China and around the world. As of 2020, more than 80 countries. As of 2020, more than 80 countries purchased and adopted Chinese surveillance equipments and techniques. My guest today has played an active role in strengthening our defenses against the Chinese high-tech companies that present serious threats and challenges to U.S. national economic security, data privacy, and democratic freedom. I'm honored to be joined by former Undersecretary of State Keith Krach. Keith Krach is the founder and chairman of the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, which has rapidly become a global authority on tech statecraft. He is best known for bringing transformational leadership to multiple sectors, including robotics, engineering software, e-commerce, higher education, philanthropy, diplomacy, and even way people sign as the CEO of DocuSign. Keith recently ran U.S. economic diplomacy as the unanimously confirmed Undersecretary of State and created transformational model of diplomacy known as the Trust Doctrine, for which he was nominated for the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. He deployed that model in the building of Clean Network, Alliance of Democracies, which defeated CCP's master plan to control 5G. He strengthened ties with Taiwan and was the highest-ranking State Department official to visit Taiwan in 41 years. Keith also led the largest onshoring in U.S. history to bring Taiwan's semiconductor giant TSMC to Arizona, and was the architect of the bipartisan $280 billion CHIPS and Science Act signed into law last month. On the 4th of July, 2020, on national TV, Keith was the first government official to openly label CCP's atrocities against the Uyghurs as genocide. His letters to American CEOs, governing boards of universities, and civil society groups drawing attention to the plight of the Uyghur people and calling for divestment from Chinese companies complicit in human rights abuses spawned a movement in college campuses. Keith, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get right to it.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Nury, and be with you and at the great Hudson Institute.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Keith, as Undersecretary of State, you become a prominent voice for those who have been subject to human rights abuses, including Uyghurs. In addition to issuing the first business advisory, you compared the genocide in the Uyghur homeland to Holocaust. And you called for divestment. And your call to action was groundbreaking, as described by the Uyghur community in particular. I noted in your recent open letter in Inside Higher Ed about the growing divestment movement on college campuses. It sounds very interesting. It's much needed. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. You know, it started with that first letter when I was Undersecretary, when we sent out the business advisory to all the CEOs about the forced labor coming out of Xinjiang and being exported all around China. So this was a follow-up to all the University Board of Governors. And, you know, I wrote it as a former chairman of the Board of Trustees at Purdue because I didn't know any of this stuff when I was the chairman. And it was really to alert and to educate these university boards of government, because U.S. universities are the envy of the world. And this is something that these universities are trusted institutions. And so to have any of this forced labor in the things that they procure, but also their endowment funds. So their endowment funds, they really don't realize, I didn't realize, of all of the Chinese stocks in there, and many of those are perpetuating the surveillance state that enable genocide, also their military companies. So in essence, what we did is we called for that divestment movement. And a student group called Athena picked that up. And this is a group that was formed by the college Young Republicans and the equivalent from the Democrat side too. And now it started really a student movement, and they're have things going on at about 30 different universities around the nation. And so I think you're going to see these universities step up and vote with their wallet on this. And and the thing that's interesting about this protest divestment movement is modeled after what happened many years ago in terms of South African apartheid, because that started at the University of California at Berkeley, spread to different universities, and then corporations picked that up. So I think you're going to hear a lot about this in the future.
That is very encouraging to hear, since we start paying closer attention to the human rights abuses in China, specifically using China's economic power, technological advances. Those individuals working in human rights space have been looking for movement and campuses. Traditionally they've been very vocal, but on this particular issue, we haven't seen much. Thank you for your leadership and starting out this conversation.
Yeah, and I really thank them. They're a tremendous group, and now you've got Congress, for example, calling for that, particularly with the large endowment funds. So this movement is gaining speed, and that's going to affect them in a very serious way. And it really sends a great signal.
Yeah, I hope this will also change the silence within the academic communities, within the university campuses.
Yes.
There, as you know, in social moments and global issues, university professors generally very vocal. On particular issues related to China, they're not. And with the student movement like this, with the divestment, with the pressure from the students, I hope professors also will make a difference.
It's one of the things I call for in the letter. At universities, the true north is academic freedom.
Right.
And in many ways, many of these Chinese student groups have hindered that with some of the things they've done in the Confucius Institutes and those kind of things. Also, intellectual property theft from the Chinese is rampant at these universities. And one of the things that I see with the CHIPS and Science Act, $280 billion, much of that research at universities is a chance to end intellectual property theft from the Chinese, because when this money is allocated, they've got to demonstrate that they have the proper safeguards for that. So it's a really really big issue, and this is something that a university can't straddle the fence on.
Right.
They've got to make that decision, and it's the moral obligation, and also fiduciary duty for these university governing board members to do something about this.
Do you think that the universities being in such an interesting, lack of a better word, situation, is that because of lack of funding for research and development projects? China has invested in some university professors that have been in the news when you were serving.
Through
1,000 talent program.
Yeah, 1,000, and that's a big issue, right? Because they're everywhere in there, and I think this is one of the things that the CHIPS and Science Act, because it's going to require some type of audit along those lines. We don't have another situation where we spend 25 years developing a stealth bomber, and then a few years later shows up in China, and it looks just, just like it.
Right.
So,
Keith, you're a tech guy. I've been closely following how technology been used or misused by dictators and authoritarian regime. And China has grown to be emerging as the leader in this endeavor, which is in line of their broader geopolitical objectives, global initiative. China's tech companies, for example, Huawei, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent are the tools of the Chinese government's
right.
Surveillance of their own people, and now the process of exporting. One of your biggest achievements was building Clean Network Alliance of Democracies, which actually hampered CCP's plan to export its surveillance operations beyond the Uyghur region. And we've been having this conversation.
Yeah.
A lot of media coverage, serious decisions were made by the administration that you serve and the current administration. Has the tide turning against China's totalitarian tech, as you call it?
Yeah, it certainly has begun to turn. What was interesting when I was the undersecretary, this was the time where it looked like the Chinese Communist Party's master plan to control 5G was unstoppable. 5G is more than a cell phone. This controls utility grids, power systems, manufacturing processes, Internet of Things, you name it. And it looked like their most important company, national champion Huawei for 5G, and the backbone of the surveillance state was unstoppable. And this is around February 2020. And they had just announced 91 deals. Both sides of the aisle were hitting the panic button. Previous U.S. efforts failed. And a team I brought into the State Department, we brought in about 12 folks from Silicon Valley. We brought in the Dean of Engineering from Purdue, Meng, who's going to be the next president, to really make a last-ditch effort to stop that. And what we did is we built the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies. So in less than a year, we had 60 countries as clean countries, representing 2/3 of the world's global GDP, 200 telcos, and a whole host of industry-leading companies to pledge to use clean technology, which is non-Chinese trusted tech. And it was all about trust, Nury. It was interesting because in my first 60 bilaterals as the undersecretary, I talked to foreign ministers or finance ministers or economic ministers, my foreign counterparts, and I'd say, hey, how important to you is China? They go, well, they're a really important trading partner. But then as bilateral meeting, they look like there was somebody else in the room. They look both ways. They go, but we don't trust them. And that rang bells in my head because just a year before, I'd stand up in front of our employees at DocuSign and our user groups, and I'd say, look, we're not in the software business. We're in the trust business because we deal with people's most important documents. Those are the ones you sign. And trust is the most important word in any language. You do business with people you trust. You buy from people you trust. You partner with people you trust. You love people you trust. And 5G is the trust business. And so we created this trust doctrine that is based on democratic principles, things like integrity, accountability, transparency, reciprocity, respect for rule of law, respect for property of all kinds, respect for sovereignty of nations, respect for the environment, and respect for human rights. And we said anybody can join the Clean Network. You just have to pledge, and your behavior has to respect that. And that really resonated. And at the end of the day, the main objective was to create a model for all areas of techno-economic aggression. And we later adopted with clean cloud, clean cable, which is underwater cable, which is really significant, clean carrier, clean apps, those kind of things. So TikTok and Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu were all in that.
Thank you so much for your exemplary leadership. This is something need to be talked about more. I'm pleased that there's some high-level discussion been underway. But how do we explain this to skeptics, particularly in Europe, and also average Americans? Why this technology threat that we're facing should concern us?
And that's the mission for the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, is to advance freedom through the adoption of trusted technology, because technology can be used for good or evil. Right? It can bring tremendous productivity,
Your product, for example.
Allows people to, sign anywhere, any place, anytime, right?
I just used it last week.
I love that. And that is a great example, but it can also be used for evil purposes. And as you pointed out, now what China's doing is they're exporting dictator out of the box with these surveillance tools, right? And they're perfecting me. In Xinjiang, Tibet.
And they are going to the wrong countries in the wrong hands.
They do. And that coupled with money, and they can see everything that they're doing. And, if you look at, authoritarian regime, they're playing a game of four-dimensional economic, military, diplomatic, and cultural chess. But technology is where it is the crossroads, and that's the main battleground, and that is why General Secretary Xi is so obsessed with it. That's why he's so obsessed with semiconductors, and to a large extent, we shine the light on what China's doing. We also need to shine the light on ourselves, because we've been enabling them. For example, Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu. Well, they're all on American exchanges, so we're financing these. And by the way,
in a way, Americans are feeling.
Yes, and an important thing to communicate, and this is what we ask the press to do this all the time, is the average American is unknowingly funding these companies, because what happens is that these companies go in these index funds like MSCI, Merchant Index Fund, or FTSE, or Bloomberg funds, and then they go into BlackRock's 431 emerging market funds, and then those go into $11.7 trillion United States pension funds. And that's one of the things that we call for, is that these should be companies that are included in capital market sanctions, which is known in government as the OFAC list. That the Treasury oversees. We've pretty much shut off a lot of technology in terms of export controls, but we're really far behind in these financial sanctions, because we're financing them.
A follow-up question on that: do you see or envision kind of a standardized approach pushing back and dealing with this threat that we're facing as a civilization? Eventually.
By the way, I think here again you're beginning to see a movement. And I live out in San Francisco. I look out the ocean. I see this little wave starting to build and build and build, and it's going to be big. What was interesting, Nury, is in January 2020, I went. When I was undersecretary, I went back home to San Francisco and held a dinner at my home for 36 of the top CEOs. You recognize the names of all these folks. And it was a safe environment. Probably 3/4 of them had been there before. And I said, let's go around the room. Tell your China horror story. And I could tell you one thing. I can't talk about everything we talked about, but I can tell you the bottom line was, it was enlightening. It was cathartic for many. It was frightening. And at the end of that, I stood up and I said, look, in Silicon Valley, we say corporate responsibility is social responsibility. It's also national security, because not only are they a real and urgent threat to democracy, but they're also a real and urgent threat to your business, because they want to put you out of business. And you could see many of these guys like, oh, you mean that happened to you too, and all that. And so when I was CEO of DocuSign, for example, I had no idea about this National Intelligence Act that requires any Chinese company, state-owned or otherwise, and any citizen to turn over any information, data, proprietary technology, intellectual property to the Chinese Communist Party or suffer the consequence.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to go to prison, or if you're in the U.S., your grandma is. And basically what that law does is it deputizes every Chinese citizen to be a spy.
Right. And on top of that, American people should also be mindful that those tech companies are state-owned enterprises. It's essentially the Chinese Communist Party owned enterprise.
Yeah.
Not only it's unethical to invest in the Chinese technology that poses national security threats, it's unconscionable. One of the authors that I followed and study on this particular subject wrote a book called We Have Been Harmonized. I always reference this book. In it, he said that each and every single Chinese high-tech firms have a red phone directly connected to the Communist Party.
Totally.
Leadership. So American people should not think that this is some politician or a president's.
They're all controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and they report to them.
It's owned by the Communist Party. All of them.
Well, if they're not owned, they have them on their board. They report them, and definitely the high-tech companies, right? Because what China's trying to do is to extend this I call it the great one-way China firewall, where all the data comes in for their malign purposes, right? Whether it's social credit scores, whether it's military AI applications, but none goes out. And then reciprocally, all the propaganda goes out, but the truth does not come in. So when they have applications like TikTok that can see your every keystroke, whether you're in the application or not, they're extending that great one-way firewall around the world.
Right. Two things that I like to remind American people or the folks who are tuning into this program. One is if you have apps like WeChat and TikTok, you're essentially letting the Communist Party to monitor, surveil every moment that you make, all the conversation that you have with your children, with your spouse. Not only that, Huawei brags about having more than having cloud storage contract with over 140 countries.
Right.
There are about 990 members at the United Nations, like officially recognized. So they are pretty much getting close to have a contract. That means that your privacy is under threat. So those.
That's exactly. That's why TikTok doesn't have any advertising.
Right.
It's like we want everybody to use it. It's the same reason why Huawei was literally in many countries giving their systems away because they want that data.
Right. Kai-Fu Lee said that China is the new Saudi Arabia for personal data. Let's talk about Taiwan. You have been a strong voice and standing with Taiwan. Not now, but when you were serving in the Trump administration. In 2020, as I introduced earlier, you were the most senior U.S. diplomat to visit Taiwan. And Taiwan's de facto ambassador to Washington, Bi-khim Hsiao, called you Taiwan's #1 friend. I myself had the privilege to visit Taiwan recently, just a few weeks ago. I am very concerned about China's military threat. It is palpable. We, as a country, we have a war fatigue. Taiwan is far out. It's not in Europe. It's not next door. Why should the American people care about Taiwan?
Well, by the way, the first thing I want to say is I thought your trip to Taiwan was extraordinary, Nury, and to pass on that message that if China takes over Taiwan politically or militarily, their fate is going to be like the people in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
And I think coming from you in particular, who grew up in a re-education camp, that I think that hit home with all of them. And the Taiwanese are courageous people. They are also a linchpin of democracy. Right. They're a role model of freedom. Right. And to General Secretary Xi, Taiwan represents dispelling his myth that the Chinese culture cannot live in a democracy. It needs authoritarian government. So he wants it in some way, shape, or form destroyed. So it's critical from a freedom standpoint and from a security standpoint in the Pacific region. It's also critical in terms of economic and technology, because Taiwan is home and absolutely dominates the manufacturing of sophisticated semiconductors. And semiconductors are in literally everything we use, anything with an on and off switch.
Yep.
And it underlies all technology. So it's the most important industry in the world, bar none. And this is where Taiwan punches above its weight. So this is really, really critical.
Yeah.
And if there's a China-Taiwan conflict, this will be devastating for industry. It'll be catastrophic for the high-tech business, right? There's already a chip shortage. You could see, how it affects the American people in terms of, hey, can't buy cars. I mean, all kinds of things. Right. And by the way, they're our friend. So I obviously support these trips that are being made. I supported Speaker Pelosi's trip over there, because we have to show up for our friends. Right. And they've been a great friend to us and courageous.
I have a follow-up question. After Putin's invasion of Ukraine, there has been very active discussions online in various think tanks whether or not Taiwan will be CCP, or Xi Jinping will invite Taiwan, or China will invade Taiwan at some point. As I agree with you, it will be devastating. And this is not something that the American people, the U.S. government can support with a few javelins, outdated Russian aircraft and stuff like this. You mentioned TSMC. Can you educate us about TSMC? Why this company is so critical?
Yeah.
What makes this company so special, so unique?
Yeah, what makes TSMC so special is, and they're probably the most important foreign company to United States national security, because they make the most sophisticated semiconductors.
They're used in supercomputers.
Used to build computers, cell phones, you name it. Cars. I mean, a car now is
a critical supply.
Sheet metal, surrounded by semiconductors. So when Putin's bloody invasion of Ukraine happened, this was a few weeks after Putin and Xi signed their mutual love letter and support each other with Taiwan and the Ukraine. That woke up. That woke up the world. Particularly, Nury, it really woke up the business world, because what ended up happening with the Russian invasion is 300 of the world's top corporations had to pull out of Russia.
Very short period of time.
A short period, hundreds of billions of dollars. They were caught off guard. They shouldn't have been caught off guard, but they were caught off guard. And so now, here's what I'm seeing out there in corporate America, that some of the most prominent board members in Europe and the United States are demanding from their CEO a China contingency plan. And particularly because China is really locking down COVID. There's 500 million people locked down.
Right.
It puts a lot of things. He's cracking down on the private sector.
It's still ongoing.
Yes. And the real estate market has collapsed. So a board member's fiduciary duty to their shareholders is to mitigate risk. So, as a board member, we'd always have a plan, in case there's a cyber breach. You want to be prepared for these big risks. Yeah. So they need a plan for this. And what happens is that when the board requests that, then the CEO goes to his executive vice presidents, supply chain guys, sales guys, finance guys, and they basically provide a chapter kind of in each one of these to build up this contingency plan. Right. And then the CEO presents it to the board. And this isn't like an annual shareholder meeting where people vote on it. They just kind of nod their heads. It gets blessed. And then the CEO usually, if he's sharp, he begins to implement it. And it's really important. So And I penned an article on this in Fortune, and I ended off, I said, look, when the dreaded becomes the inevitable, it's time to develop a plan and execute on. Now, at the Institute for Tech Diplomacy, we've gotten a lot of requests from corporations. What does that average, China plan, China contingency plan look like? Risk mitigation plan? Can you give us a checklist? So we're developing that right now.
That's great. When I was looking at the Chinese plans, specifically after that massive suspension of pull-out of business from Russia, it seems to me that the Chinese government is also getting ready, or at least getting some tips and lessons. Like, what do we do? I mean, financial transactions, the financial institutions are key. And I'm so pleased that 3 top banks made a pledge that if China invades Taiwan, they will suspend their business practices in China. So that's a very positive development.
And so this is another part of that tidal wave that's forming out there in terms of the world waking up.
Yes. You pointed out how ESG, investing in Chinese entities, inherently conflicted. A new Wharton Business School case study uses a solar panel supply chain as a vivid example of this conflict. Investors, consumers, voters want clean supply chain for clean energy, but the ESG investment industry has failed to deliver. Instead, it has increased the supply chain for solar panels, has become deeply entangled in the Uyghur genocide. As you know, they use slave labor to make polysilicon. So what is ESG? And should Chinese solar companies that profit from slave labor be included in ESG investments?
This Wharton Business School case study, really interesting. And it was actually based off of the work we did. We had a clean markets campaign, which was very similar to Clean Network. It leveraged right on top of that. There were 5 prongs to it. And it talks about that. So when you look at ESG, that stands for environment, social, and governance. And so companies that are ESG compliant, I put quotes around that, go into be classified as this. Now, it has grown over the last 15 years from 17 billion to over 40 trillion. So all these things are going in there. And in this case, it begs the question of, should any Chinese stocks be in ESG? And my personal opinion is none should be in ESG for 3 reasons: E, S, and G. And the solar panel case really magnifies that. So, for example, and Nury, I know you know this, but maybe the audience does. But solar panels, 90% of that solar panel business and the polysilicon that goes into that, the solar industry is in China, and the vast majority of that is in Xinjiang.
Right.
So why? Well, obviously, it's cheap labor cost, and they utilize that forced labor. But the other thing is, to manufacture a solar panel, it's very energy intensive. So the amount of energy a solar panel puts out over 3 years is the amount you need to manufacture. And they just happen to have the 2 biggest coal-fired power plants in the world. It's coal region. So here they are. They're exporting these solar panels all over the world, made with dirty coal, unregulated. So I think that kind of disqualifies them for the E. Then S stands for social, and the number one thing there is human rights. And so here they are. They're manufacturing these solar panels with slave labor and in a place where they commit genocide. That's strike 2. Strike 3 is governance. So governance, one of probably the most important things is from a financial standpoint and transparency. And can you audit the books? Does it comply with general accounting practices? Does it follow something similar to Sarbanes-Oxley? Not one Chinese company can. You can't audit these companies. So none of these companies should be in ESG. And what this case compares and contrasts is this Clean Capital Markets campaign that we put together. and it really focuses in on Larry Fink at BlackRock and how he's really perpetuating that and driving a lot of investment in these companies. And ESG is supposed to be for good. And these ESG companies are enabling slave labor. They're enabling, environmental destruction, and they don't follow good governance.
And we don't compete, and we're not competing with a country in this important industry that uses slave labor and dirty coal.
Yeah, and by the way, here's if anything, I was responsible for economic growth, energy, and the environment, and energy security is national security.
Absolutely.
Wars are started and lost because of energy, and industry experts are saying by 2050. 60% of the world's energy will come from solar. So here we are. It's like we will if we don't course correct, we will be dependent on China for energy, and I don't think that's a good position that we want to be in. So it's also a national security issue at the very top, and that's the inconvenient truth of the inconvenient truth.
Why can't we bring this industry back home?
By the way, we can. We just have to put a lot of focus on. And there's been things that have been going on, because, we started this business, right? And the Chinese came in over the last 20 years, classic thing, stole the intellectual property, then begin to build up their firms, few joint ventures, and then they weren't reciprocal with their market, and they came in and flooded our market. It's right out of their playbook. So we can win that back. And by the way, that's one of the things that the CHIPS and Science Act is all about too. So investment in research and all these things that take long-term investments and to create sources of capital, because we clearly have the scientists and we need the folks. This is a national imperative.
Right. Do you think that the U.S. companies involved in the solar panel industry should leave?
Should leave China?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any operating over there. There's like two companies.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to grow them, and we need to grow more. The other thing that goes into solar panels, the main thing is a thing called polysilicon.
Yeah.
And this is the main ingredient that goes in semiconductors and solar panels. That's also very labor intensive. And all those companies too, or most of them, are in Xinjiang, because that's also energy intensive. So we've got to get that business back too.
Something related to this topic, bipartisan consensus on China. On the climate crisis, we have been told as Americans that we have to tone down on human rights in order to get climate cooperation. You and I are bipartisan. This is a national security concern. What can you tell us about the unproductive, if not dangerous, proposition of telling American people that we need to tone down in order to get? Do we really get China's cooperation by toning it down on value issues or value concerns?
That's a classic China move. Their doctrine is seduce with money and reinforce with intimidation, retaliation.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody from China should tell Americans to tone it down. They suppress their own people.
Right.
You're not going to suppress ours. And by the way, for these guys to insist that they're going to couple together human rights, where they're committing genocide, with cooperating on environment, to me is laughable. And we have to be very direct with them on that and say, no way.
Absolutely. Keith, you have defied the conventional wisdom in Washington that Republicans and Democrats cannot work together on important issues such as China. You have been thought out by both sides of the aisles on CHIPS Act, for example, Taiwan policy, Uyghur genocide, and protecting American investors. The Biden administration's top Indo-Pacific affairs chief. Asia chief, Kurt Campbell, recently said that almost all the work that Keith did at the State Department, including Trusted Network, the Blue Dot Initiative, etc., have been followed on in the Biden administration. And it's in many respects, that's the highest tribute to your exemplary work at in the Trump administration. That is quite a compliment.
It is a great compliment because
Why
there's not a tradition of that.
Yes, why bipartisanship is important in the line of work that we do.
It is, and I really believe in what the great late Senator Vandenberg said is partisan politics stops at the water's edge. So when it comes to our national security, when it comes to issues like combating China's four-dimensional aggression, it's absolutely critical. And there is nothing that terrifies General Secretary Xi more than a United States. And by the way, for the most important constituency, who's our allies, continuity of policy is everything. So, look, I just think these issues are just above domestic politics, And if there's anything I learned, Nury, serving in government, I've been a businessman my whole life. I grew up in Ohio, very different. I had no education camp. It was a white picket fence, the dog, 3 kids, and we just were happy and safe. But what I learned is that this democracy that we have, this freedom we have, is a 200-plus year experiment. And you have to fight every day for it because the natural order of things, the law of physics, is the bad king, the dictator, and the emperor. And you've got to fight every day. And by the way, if it wasn't for the United States, there'd be 100 companies or countries that don't even taste that freedom.
Absolutely.
So we can't take it for granted. I think that was another thing about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I have 10-year-old twins, and they saw what was going on TV, and for these guys to understand, people are willing to die for freedom, right. And put their lives on the line. I think the world is waking up to that.
Certainly, when you look at the bravery that the Ukrainian people showed,
so brave.
They are fighting for their freedom.
Yes.
On the other hand, Russian soldiers are escaping because they are fighting for payroll.
Yep. Yeah. Right.
I
mean, I'll take that bet any day of the week, right? I mean, and that's why they've just defied all the odds. Yes. I mean, everybody thought Russia would come in at a clean sweep. Most of all, Putin thought that. But contraire, mon frère, right? They're going to push them out.
Right. We have established China Center here at the Hudson Institute to maintain that bipartisan consensus. In addition to all the legislative actions that you advocated for, advised, anything else? Do you have any initiatives, any recommendations for members of Congress? We will have new Congress next year.
Yeah.
That should consider mandating to specifically address this tech authoritarianism issue.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Yeah. I'll give you an example of one. This is when we were working on the capital market sanctions. So first of all, Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu should go on the capital market sanctions list. One of the other things that we did is we looked at all these different subsidiaries that are on that OFAC list. So in other words, United States can't invest in these companies. Then we looked at the commerce entity list. That means United States can't export technology to them. And I just asked that simple question in government. Well, have we ever compared the list? They go, well, not really. Nobody's asked for that. And I go, well, let's compare the list. And out of the 500 or so companies on the commerce entity list, 493 were not on the OFAC list. So in other words, we're giving them technology, but we're financing them. There's a lot of key things. One of the things that we're doing, for example, at the Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue that we just recently launched is a Global Tech Security Commission. And it's a 2-year commission, has the backing of the White House, both sides of the aisle, and it's an international commission. And so this is all about, putting together what we think will end up to be the de facto global tech security strategy for the free world. And there'll be we'll focus on the 21 national security tech sectors. We'll have commissioners from each country and those kind of things. So, I think that's one of the things that Congress, I think, is really, really keen on.
I wanted to thank you for inviting me to join the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy as a senior advisor. I'm so delighted that
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor to work with you. As you may know, President Biden issued executive order this past June banning U.S. persons from owning stock in Dahua, Hikvision, along with China's military industrial complex, companies and surveillance technology companies. Is executive orders like this will address issues that we've been discussing?
Yeah, it will. And one of the things, we got that kicked off in the prior administration, focused on military companies. And the beautiful thing about what's happened in the Biden administration is he's institutionalized that and added companies to it. And now, not just military companies, but these surveillance companies, they're enabling human rights abuses. Yeah. So this is really critical. I mean, if we're serious about human rights, which we are in this country, we have to, put our money where our mouth is, and let them hear the empty cash register ringing a little bit, and these companies, they want to export their technology all over the world, right? For, like we were talking about, dictator out of the box. So this is good. Now, the one thing I would say is, a lot of times there's a big gap in government between policy and execution.
Right.
So in terms of the implementation, it's critical. And a key area in this might be a little technical, but is when they put out the FAQs, the questions and answers, because there's the devil's in the details. So it's got to make sure that it closes all the loopholes. And I think that's something that the Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue and the Hudson Institute, we're capable of staying on top of that.
Do you think that this executive order or similar executive order should be issued to expand this endeavor on other companies other than just a Hikvision and the Dahua?
By the way, and there's a whole list of. Yeah. So these are the things that should be extended on that commerce entity list, where we're saying we can't export the technology.
This ban only addresses the securities. Is there any need to address the private equities as well?
Say that one more time.
So this is, we can skip this. This ban only addresses the securities. Is there any equal need to address private equity investments?
By the way, that's a good question. Yeah. The answer is absolutely yes. So not just public companies, but all types of financing. And by the way, it should include the over-the-counter markets too. It should include, bonds. It should really include any type of financial transaction where a United States company or a United States citizen is making a purchase of that stock and, in essence, investing. We should also, and this is a big part of the Global Tech Security Commission, we should also make sure our allies do the same. Our allies in Japan, our allies in the UK, our allies in the EU, Australia, everywhere.
I want to touch upon an extraordinary case that happened last year. One of the Chinese tech companies, which were sanctioned for its role in building China's digital surveillance state. It appears that their lawyers found a loophole and it was able to continue doing business with U.S. companies. The case was since time managed to get out of Commerce Department's BIS export sanction by getting Commerce Department to change the listing so that the only since time Beijing branch would be under sanction. What can be done about on the issues like this?
Yeah,
so I mean, this loopholes are a serious problem.
Yes, and this is where like those FAQs come in and the loopholes. So China has been seeing this coming for years and years. So what they do is they develop an unnatural amount of subsidiaries. You never see it in a natural world, you know, and that's for the purpose of deception and concealment. And we've got to make sure, and we did this at the State Department. The OFAC list ended up being about 40 major countries, but they had 1,400 subsidiaries. So we have to make sure not only do we sanction that main mothership, but the subsidiaries coming off, because the mothership that's listed is like a holding company. There's nothing there, and then they break them into subsidiaries. And so, can you imagine this, Nury? We've got lawyers here in the United States. We're getting paid by China to find loopholes in our government. Could you imagine us as businessmen going over to China? Hey, we hired a China lawyer. Hey, can you help us find loopholes in
Unthinkable.
PRC? Unthinkable. Yeah. And this is where the issue of reciprocity in everything should be applied. And you know, this is one of the things we talked about. We talked about clean capital markets, clean funds, clean investments, clean technology. How about clean law firms? That'd be a novel concept. I actually ran that I ran that by a really prominent lawyer who I just absolutely love. And I wrote him an email when I was in the State Department. This shows you how naive I was, right? Yeah. Coming in from Silicon Valley. And his response back to me on that is, I think I need to come talk to you. And so he comes in, he goes, hey, look, this is Washington. Yeah. Law firms are making a ton of money from the Chinese, right?
They've been very busy.
Here again, seduce with money. Right.
One of the former White House senior official reportedly, a partner, one of the mega firms, represents Huawei. So this is,
I mean, how can that be?
Yes, absolutely. For the remainder of our time here, Keith, I would like to learn more about the concept of tech diplomacy.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say that you invented that term.
Well, by the way, I actually think, you know, we just had Secretary Blinken, the Secretary of State Blinken, and Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, out at Purdue. You know, looking at everything we have going as national, you know, probably country's top national security university. And Mitch Daniels, our president, said, hey, I think you invented the term, Secretary of State Blinken. And I think he did when he was in the prior administration as Deputy Secretary. He saw the need. When we came in and really focused on that. And so if you look at what tech diplomacy is, it's advancing freedom through the adoption of trusted technology by rallying and unifying our allies and our partners and leveraging the innovation and resources of the private sector, and using these democratic values like human rights and respect for rule of law to our advantage instead of, you know, the authoritarian regime use it for their advantage. So maybe we invented the definition, and then the other thing that happened was a thing called, what's now known as tech statecraft. So what we did is we integrated high-tech business strategies, things we use in what we call economic warfare out in Silicon Valley, because the object of the game is to be the category king, because players number 2, 3, 4, you know, they have to fight over the scraps. Category king gets 60 to 80% of the market cap. But we play by the rules, because if you don't have your integrity out there, you're not going to last very long. And so we take those strategies, integrated with foreign policy tools based on the trust chart. And that's kind of the practice, the science of tech statecraft. So that's in essence what we used in terms of developing this clean network alliance of democracy model, many of the things we did. So at the Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, we are teaching that to diplomats all over the world and also the private sector, because private sector has a lot of competitors over in China, and they saw what happened with the clean network. We doubled the market cap of Ericsson and Nokia, and next thing you know, Huawei's revenues are down 38%, right? So that kind of caught everybody's attention. One of the other big things that we do, an initiative we just started, is called the Trust Tech Finance Initiative. So the aim of this initiative, and this is a joint venture with Opportunity International, which is the biggest issuer of microloans in the world, and it's focused on people living on less than $2 a day. It's this. It is closing the digital divide in low-income countries with trusted technology. So it's creating packaged solutions, hardware, software, training, and providing those like to our econ officers around the world, to our ambassadors around the world, to countries that are typically low income, and particularly in the rural area, because this is where China's really, they're just giving away the farm there. And our objective is to provide these micro entrepreneurs technology for under a penny a day. And it just so happens that in the technology world, we hit a paradigm shift, because now you can get a smartphone for $2.
Right.
And so it was impossible up to that point. And this is an issue we started at the State Department, but we're carrying it on. And we've got the excitement of Microsoft and Google and Meta and all these guys want to participate in this.
Our program is coming to an end. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with us?
Well, I just want to thank you, Nury, because you're a hero.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
And, the most important thing for you to do is tell your story again and again and again and again and again. And because here in the United States, the average citizen just takes a lot of this for granted. And the other thing I want to say is you've done so much.
Thank you.
For the world, for the Uyghurs,
Thank you.
For everybody. And by the way, also for the 1.2 billion people in China that are not part of the League Communist Party, right?
Right.
So, so that I think a deep debt of gratitude goes to you, and also the Hudson Institute, which is a great partner with the Institute for Tech Diplomacy, and because as we talked about, we cannot take this for granted. So thank you.
You're so kind. Thank you so much. With those insightful comments, I'd like to conclude by saying, sharing a few thoughts. Technology and economic development are supposed to foster freedom and improve our lives, as we discussed today. And the Chinese progress in science and technology, economic development, are not moral progress, as opposed to what American people have been told by some opinion leaders or China experts. On the contrary, Chinese technology enables, facilitates collective punishment and enslavement of vulnerable population, in the case of the polysilicon manufacturing. We already engage in battle for freedom and democracy. We will not be fully equipped to fight unless we fully recognize and acknowledge the gravity and urgency of the threat, and we must act swiftly. Today's topic is particularly important. I hope you will come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely.
We need to continue this conversation. It's a very important conversation. As you perfectly pointed, this is a national security issue that requires more than one event, one conversation. I've learned so much from you. It's an honor to host you here. Please come back to see us again.
I will, and please come to the Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for a great partnership.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much.